I believe we are going to see a massive expansion of Section 8, the Housing Rental Assistance Program, or an entirely new program, and I don't even know what it'll be. But, we are moving into an era where the government is going to be much more involved in the economy, much more involved in our lives, for better or worse. Call it socialism. It's here, folks. Many things happening. One is called supply-demand shock, and that's an economic phenomenon that hasn't happened really since the 70s, but it's happening again now. And what this means is that initially, when things get bad in a recession, usually it's because demand falls off. And like you said earlier, Ken, consumers are saving money. And, this is ultimately a good thing, right? But it slows the economy down because nobody's spending. And 70% of the economy in the US is based on consumer spending. Okay? So it's huge when demand falls off. When people get scared and they stop buying things and they're staying home and they're not spending, demand collapses. And that puts us into a recession. But the flip side of it, and this is the weird part in this era, is that also supply has declined. And so there was a housing shortage going into this. And now that the home is becoming the center of the universe and people are much more committed to their housing than they ever have been in human history, possibly, because they can work remotely, they can work out remotely, and they want to socially distance, and there will be a post-traumatic stress disorder coming out of this, a PTSD phenomenon, where people want to live in a larger home, a more suburban style of living, non-high-rise, where they can socially distance. So an example of supply-demand shock, I'll just give you a quick one. In the 70s, it was mostly in the oil market. And, people might know about the gas lines. I remember when I was a little kid, we waited in line for 3 hours just to get a tank of gas. Okay. It was crazy what was going on. That was an example of supply-demand shock, and it's a miserable economic malady. And so in the airlines, when the pandemic broke out, if you look at, I just did this myself going to Google Flights, and I charted a flight from Miami to Los Angeles, okay? And you see that the pricing was normal before the pandemic, okay? And, it cost you maybe $325 to buy that ticket, right? But then as the demand collapsed, the tickets got really cheap. And you could buy a ticket from Miami to LAX for less than $100. But then what happened is the airlines started canceling routes and grounding flights. And we've all seen the pictures probably of all of these jumbo jets, these huge, $100 million plus airplanes sitting in parking lots in storage, or where airports have closed multiple runways just so they could use those runways as a parking lot for jets, where they're just all stacked up on the runway and they're not flying. So now the price for that same ticket went way up. It went to $437 is the high. This is supply-demand shock. And this is going to happen in housing. This will happen in the housing market. Now, look, Ken, I saw your video about, and it was a great video, by the way, where you had all the circles, the one I'm talking about on your, yeah. And you talked about how we were going to go into this recession/depression. I don't know if you called it depression, but it may well be one. And there are going to be lots of foreclosures. There's going to be a lot of bankruptcies. We're already seeing just the tip of the iceberg on that. I think it's going to get a lot worse. So I do not deny for a moment that the economy is going to be very hard hit. It already has been. And you did this other great video, Ken, where you talked about, how the normal unemployment rate, is maybe 4% or so, right? And, now it's skyrocketed. And we don't have to get everybody back to work, but the delta between the normal unemployment and what it is now, we got to get those people back to work. And how long will that take? And the reality is, a lot of those jobs, they ain't coming back, if you ask me. They're gone. Yeah, they're gone. And so we are going to wake up to a very different world, okay? And we don't have time to talk about it today, but trickle-up economics is the opposite of trickle-down economics, where every contract in the world is now being renegotiated. We saw this during the Great Recession. It's like a game of hot potato. The renter says, well, I can't pay my rent. And then the landlord says, okay, well, I can't evict you right now. And by the way, that's changing, but, and rents are largely being collected, thankfully. The rent stats aren't as bad as we all thought they might be. Now, granted, we're only a couple months in, but it's looking like that's not such a bad problem, okay? But, many of those landlords or just homeowners go to their lender and say, hey, I can't pay the mortgage. Give me a forbearance, a loan modification, a workout, or a short sale, or I'm just going to let the property go, like they did during the Great Recession. We're still early, so we don't know how this is going to turn out. And then that lender passes that burden on to its mortgage-backed securities holders, right? And then they pass on that burden because they lost their return on investment to somebody else. So it's this game of hot potato where everybody passes everything down the line. Trickle-up economics, okay? The idea that I would love to see is a more libertarian world, I'm dreaming. It's not going to happen, okay? We're going the other direction. No matter Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Also, the rich are going to get richer. They're already getting richer because the rich have capital during tough times when other people don't have capital, so they can seize opportunities when opportunities are there. And Ken, in one of your recent videos, you talked about that. It's a great thing. Universal basic income. Even my most libertarian friends, and I had the presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, on my podcast talking about this. UBI or universal basic income, it was already coming before the pandemic. And that was largely due to technology just destroying jobs. The economist, one of my favorite economists, Joseph Schumpeter, coined this phrase called creative destruction many years ago. And he talked about how free markets and capitalism creatively destroy businesses to create better new businesses. And this is a good thing, although it's painful at the time. There's a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of hardship, but we come back better. And in that process, technology was already taking away a lot of jobs. Just think when all the trucks and all the delivery cars are self-driving and your internet shopping deliveries are delivered by drones, okay? That is going to destroy a massive amount of jobs, and those jobs will never come back. Okay, so technology is a creative destruction force, and a pandemic and social distancing is even more destructive to that. So I think we're going to see a universal basic income. It's coming. There's another thought that's really popular with the millennial generation, and that's called MMT, or modern monetary theory. I think it's largely a fantasy, but we're going to have it because we're already moving toward it. Okay. And I won't go into what it is today, but it's just going to be more of a thing. We're also going to see a push toward a cryptocurrency that is not necessarily Bitcoin or any of the others, but it's a digital dollar. The cryptocurrency that's going to win the game is going to be the one sponsored by the government and the Federal Reserve. That's the one that's going to win. Okay. And I'd love to be wrong about that. I'd love to see Bitcoin win the game. I just think the forces against Bitcoin are far too powerful, governments and central banks. And the dollar is going to be the thing, no matter what anybody says. about, Ken, we've all heard it. The dollar's not backed by anything. Well, I have news for you. The dollar is backed by aircraft carriers and nuclear missiles. Okay, that's what the dollar's backed by. A standing army that is bigger than anything and more powerful than anything the human race has ever known. So if you think the dollar's not backed by anything, you're absolutely out of your mind. Okay, sorry about that, folks, but the dollar is very well backed. And, it's a game of comparison. When you say, oh, the dollar, the government's spending so much money. Yes, that's all true. I agree. And these deficits and the national debt, blah, blah, blah. I've heard all the arguments. I've made a lot of those arguments myself. And you're right. It's true. But the question is, compared to what? Compared to Japan, that has a 230% debt to GDP ratio? The US has very little debt compared to Japan, okay? The third largest economy in the world. The US is in a very, very good position in the global on the global stage. And the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and that isn't going to change anytime soon.